Hey guys, welcome back to the 11 Yanks channel, the channel that covers everything in the American men's soccer landscape. Today on the channel, we have part 2 of my interview with former U20 technical director, U20 head coach, USMNT player, and assistant coach, Tab Ramos. In this particular episode, he talks about Gregg Berhalter. He talks about whether or not this team has made any progress, and he expounds on the comments he made in the broadcast about whether or not this team has made the progress that we all think they should be making. He talks about youth development. He talks about the growth of soccer in this country, about MLS. He talks about signature wins. He talks about where we should be and what we need to do to get there. It was eye-opening, interesting, and always fascinating to get the point of view of somebody who's been immersed in the soccer culture and the soccer ecosystem in the United States since the late 80s. Really enjoyed having him on. This is the last episode. So give it a watch, give it a like, give it a subscribe if you're new to the channel. Thanks for watching, guys, and I hope you enjoy it. Speaking of Gregg, we're at a time now where, he just was renewed for a second cycle, and we're going into a very exciting time in American soccer history. The Copa America here again next year. We qualified for the Olympics for the first time in forever. And obviously the World Cup at home. The federation under, Matt Crocker and Cindy Parlocone and JT Batson still believe that Gregg is the guy to help this team go forward and to take us to hopefully better finishes in the World Cup and the Copa America than we've had in the past. You recently mentioned on a broadcast that you feel that this team maybe hasn't made as much progress as we would have expected them to. Gregg's been in charge now for 5 years. Can you expand on that? What are we not seeing that we should be seeing from this team?
Well, let me start with this. First of all, I have to say, I was criticized for saying on TV, actually on Telemundo, that we should give, regardless of how Gregg became the coach this second cycle, that we need to give him time and we need to give him the benefit of the doubt, because like any coach, we just need to be supportive. And so we've done that. But I also have said, as recent as our last game, I'm not seeing the growth of the group. I'm not seeing it. Now the games are going by, and we're seeing games going by, and now we are giving time. And now we have to start looking back and saying, you're right, it is 5 years. And let me compare these 5 years to the early 90s, what happened to 1989 to 1994. And look at the progress that was made there. Look at the teams that were beaten there. We had already beaten England. You had beaten, you had tied Italy. You had, you were beating Ireland. You were losing to Germany 4-3 in a thriller. You were getting some real, you were beating Romania on the road. You were already getting, you could see the development of what's happening. And here we find ourselves with our last game being whatever it was against Trinidad.
Yeah,
and
2-1.
And barely getting through. And I'm thinking, so I'm criticized for giving the benefit of the doubt and giving time. But at some point, I also have to say, okay, how much time is time to see progress? And I think you called this the golden generation. At some point, golden generation has to get results. They have to come. We need that. We need that. Because think about this. Think if in January we played Brazil and we beat them 1-0, right? Everybody's going to go, wow, the golden generation, we beat them 1-0. These are results that were happening 25 years ago already.
Yeah.
25 years ago, we went to, 1995, we went to Copa America semifinal. We beat Argentina 3-0. That was almost 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So what does this golden generation need to do to move the needle? And to move the needle, we have to go to a semifinal of the World Cup. We have to win Copa America. That's moving the needle. Because right now, just getting a result against a good, by the way, we don't have a schedule good enough to play good teams anymore. But I think we need something. We need something. And I think we have great players. We have great players who play for the best clubs in the world, and that's what we always hope for, to be
Mhm.
able to turn on the TV and watch, you know, Pulisic play for Milan, to watch McKinney play for Juventus.
Mm.
You know, that's what we always craved that. And but now the national team needs to reflect where we are
Mm.
individually.
I agree with you 100%. You talked about, what would move the needle, winning Copa America or making a World Cup semifinal. Do you think that's realistic and doable with the talent that we have? Because there's several arguments here. Some people say, oh, our players are overhyped, that because they got a lot of attention from a young age and, because they're playing for big clubs around the world, maybe we overhype them and maybe they're not that good, you know? And then some people would say, well, if we could get those results with the players, and you mentioned a couple of the results we had in the 90s, but you could point to the Confederation Cup team that made it to a final, beating the best Spain in history along the way, and 2-0 up against Brazil at halftime under Bob Bradley, or even under Jurgen making a Copa America semifinal, under Bruce in 2002 making a World Cup quarterfinal against a very good Mexico team at the time. So why have we not done, like, Gregg Berhalter's teams? He has no, Jesse Marsh pointed this out recently, he has no signature win. There's not a single win we can point to and go, he beat this team that was clearly better than us. Like, the best we can point to right now is a draw with England at this last World Cup. It's a little uninspiring. Do we have the players, in your opinion? And you've coached a lot of these players since the youth teams to win a Copa America, to make it to a World Cup semifinal. Is that a realistic expectation?
Well, look, I would say this: in 2019, we knocked France out of the U20 World Cup,
Mm-hmm.
not because we had better players than France. We have good players, but sometimes good players have to win against teams that are better
Yeah.
than you are. And I think I agree if that's what Jesse said. I mean, at some point you need big wins. You just have to get big wins at some point. I mean,
Yeah.
otherwise, what are we doing? I mean, I can't remember. And look, by the way, when I started with the national team, we were getting 2,000 people in Connecticut for a game. So like this is,
Yeah.
we were nobodies. We were nobodies, and somehow we were together as a group enough to get results when we were getting a couple $100 for playing for the Brooklyn Italians and then going to the national team. I know it's different times, but it's the difference of our players. Let's say, for the people that you say that are saying maybe our players are not good enough, and I'm not saying that, but let's say for the people that are saying that, is the difference between our players and their players that big that we can't get big results sometimes? I'm not sure that's the case. I think we need to start doing that. I think every
Yeah.
once in a while we need big wins.
Yeah.
We need something, because I can't remember, and I can go back all the way to 1988. I can't remember a period of 5 years when we've gotten really no results and we can hang our hats on for
Yeah.
5 years. And then you can go from every year from 1988 till now. And if you could name me a 5-year period where we don't have a win we can hang our hat on.
Yeah.
Like, okay, no, I understand. By the way, credit's given where credit's due. We did beat Mexico in a Gold Cup final. We can't say we haven't done anything. We did win the Nations Cup, for whatever that is. We did win that. But we did that in any other 5-year period, likely also. Right? So we have to, and this is why I'm saying personally, I'm not saying that certainly that Gregg is a bad coach. I'm not saying any of that. What I'm saying is I'm not seeing growth.
Yeah. I think you could also argue with Mexico, this might be the weakest Mexico we've seen in a long time, just in terms of their player pool. Do you agree with that?
I would agree with that, but not as a way to take credit away from our guys.
Sure.
But I would agree with that in general. Yeah, we used to beat Mexico, and Mexico were clearly better than we were.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about player development, because that's obviously a big specialty of yours, and where we're at in terms of the players that we're developing. I think it'd be silly to not look around and say there hasn't been progress. Like, there has been. I think when we had the U.S. Soccer's Development Academy that was instituted in '07, and then Jurgen tweaked it, when he came through. And that's gone now, right? MLS clubs are primarily responsible for player development. I think would you agree that we've definitely gotten better at player development over the last 5 to 10 years?
So much. So much. I mean, I'm so happy at where things are, and I'm so happy that MLS has developed a way to sort of force ownership spend money on youth development and on facilities for youth development. I think that's huge for us. That's going to pay dividends long term. I couldn't have imagined that we could have been at a better moment in terms of player development. I think our clubs, I think the league, and I think the federation, to be fair, with the Development Academy, as sort of a Kickstarter, has done a great job.
That being said, we still don't really produce world-class players here in the U.S. While I think we've gotten better, we're still a way off from competing with the likes of Argentina or Brazil, France, Germany, England, Spain, in terms of producing really world-class players. I mean, world-class is a subjective thing, right? There's not a definition for what is world-class. But if you say top 10 player in the world in your position, I don't think we have anybody, right, who's in that category. What is missing in the American soccer development landscape? So instead of producing a Brendan Aronson or, even a Christian Pulisic, who you could argue is our best player right now, what's the difference between producing a Christian Pulisic and a Kylian Mbappe or a Cristiano Ronaldo or, even a Vinicius Jr., What's missing? What do we need to do to get there to where we're cranking out guys who are regularly best 10 in the world in their position?
That's a great question. No one has the pill for developing great players. And in this case, I'm assuming you're referring to world class players as what you just mentioned, Mbappe or that type. I don't even think France has the pill for developing Mbappe. Otherwise, they'd have a lot more of them. They have one, right?
Right.
So I think it's going to take time. I think, like I said before, we have all of these environments in which players are developing. Could the coaching be better in different places? I'm not sure, because I'm not in every environment. I'm sure there are some great coaches out there teaching players. But I think it's part of our culture evolving and becoming more of a soccer nation. And maybe as we become more of a soccer nation, we are more likely to develop players who are world-class players. It doesn't necessarily have to do with our environment. I think sometimes you also have to get a little bit lucky that one of them comes along, because look at the stories sometimes of the players who are the best players. They're not ones who were taught to be best players. They're not ones that developed under one specific system that made them the best players. There's sort of a little bit of a God-given talent type thing where, man, this guy was born to be this, and he happened to be in this great environment who helped him to do all of these things. And so I think we need a little time, and we need a little bit of luck.
Do you think that, for example, if you go to South America or even Mexico or heck, California, there are a lot of players who, don't go into an academy at early ages and get coached and taught to pass the ball. They play in the streets. They play with their friends. They play in the park with their dad on the weekend. Like, South American environment, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, they create more creative, technical players because of, street soccer and just playing in, with the ball for hours every day in the favelas or wherever. Do you think that here in the U.S. we overcoach at younger ages? Like, do we coach creativity and talent out of players sometimes?
Well, but do we have another choice? I mean, because that's what we have to look at. So if you're a kid from the suburbs somewhere, where are you going to play if it's not in an organized team? You actually can't go to the street and play, because who else is playing with you?
Right.
And
so it's cultural.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. What?
No, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just saying, so you're saying it's cultural.
Yeah, I think it's part of our culture. We're just a different country, and I'm not sure that in Germany all the great players are playing on the street and developing on the street either.
Mm-hmm.
Nor are they doing it, although maybe in England a little bit more, not as much. So I think it's a tough question because I grew up playing on the street, but yet I grew up in Uruguay till I was 12,
Mm-hmm.
and I grew up playing on the street. But at the same time, at 6 years old, I signed with my first club. So by 8 years old, I was playing a game that I had to win. Like you play to win. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's not like okay, it doesn't matter who wins. You have fun. No, it's not about having fun. It's about winning games already at 8 years old. So every country has its own way. I'm not sure that way would work here.
Right.
Um, so every country is different, and I think we just have to figure out how we develop our guys and that matching the culture that we are, because we are a different country.
So, but you talked about, needing to win at 8, working at academy, but then you also went and played on the street with your friends when you weren't at the academy, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, the rest
Yeah.
of the day I was playing out on the street. Yeah.
Right.
But
I think
like for example, my son couldn't do that because if he
right.
goes out on the street, there's no one else playing. Like you can't put you put the rocks there as a goal and all that. I did that, but
Yeah.
that doesn't happen here.
So we need a massive cultural shift and love for the game. I wanted to talk to you about, is there a demographic that we're ignoring? Because I live in Southern California. I've lived in Chicago, and I see Hispanic kids all the time, playing with their dads or just playing together. But are those kids not being filtered because of pay to play? Are those really talented kids that have soccer culture bred into them from their parents, from, coming from a background of like soccer first families, right? They don't always make it into our academies, right? And oftentimes that's because their parents can't afford it. Is that demographic still being ignored, or are we making progress with trying to get some of those, players that comes from soccer first families and soccer first cultures into our environment and our ecosystem?
Well, let me say this first. I will defend the pay to play because there's really no other way to play. Someone has to pay the coach.
Right.
Someone has to pay for the field. Someone has to pay for the uniforms. So someone has to pay. So
Right.
it's always going to be pay to play. Now, if we're saying that we're missing a lot of players because players don't have an opportunity to do that, that's a different question altogether. And I'm sure, by the way, that we could be missing players. And this is something that I was at U.S. Soccer for 8 years, so this was always the battle. How can we get to the one player in the park that someone else has seen? And we really tried everything to try to get the players to come and play somewhere. At the same time, I can tell you this: I basically grew up in this country after 12 years old. My parents, I used to come home and tell my dad, "Hey, Dad, I made the regional team," and he used to be like, "Hey, that's great." And I said, "Well, it costs $250 to go to the camp." And my dad used to tell me, "Well, you ain't going to the camp." And so I wasn't going
Yeah.
until someone from the camp called my house and said, the camp starts tomorrow. We haven't received your registration. And I was like, "Well, I'm not going because my parents aren't paying." And they're like, "Well, don't worry about paying. We want you here."
Mm.
So what I'm saying by this is that usually, and I'm just going to throw a number, but usually 90% of the time, the good players will be able to play for free.
Mm.
Just about everywhere. Everyone wants a good player on their team, and there's always a way.
Mm.
And I'm saying maybe we miss some, and we definitely have to do a better job on the recruiting and scouting side.
Mm.
But I think I'm comfortable to say that we find most of the players.
Okay. Okay. MLS is continuing to expand and grow. We're in a moment now where the world's eyeballs are kind of on MLS because of Messi. What do you think the future of the league is in terms of, in the past we had Don Garber talk about, being a league of choice by 2022. We're a ways off from being, a top 5 league in the world per se that can compete. But what do you think the future is? Like right now, I would argue that MLS is a good development league for young players to get their start in and then go to Europe and test themselves there. And then if they can't make it in Europe, they can always come back and have a good career, getting paid to play soccer. Is that the ceiling for MLS, or do you think there is a world where MLS can compete with the top leagues in the world? Because obviously you have to compete financially, right? That's a big one. And prestige-wise, you have the Champions League in Europe, you have Premier League, prestige-wise, that's where players want to play too. So it's not just money. What is that? Is that possible in the future? What does it look like, and what do we have to do to get there?
Well, I think there's one, obviously as you mentioned just before, the league has done a really good job in terms of closing the gap, right? So it's not like you're going to have an MLS team go overseas and play some team and embarrass themselves. We have good teams, we have good players. I think the issue that I guess needs to be addressed, and I'm sure is being addressed, is the fact that we need to make soccer an American game. How do we get people to watch? I mean, how many people watch an MLS game on a weekend?
Not many.
You're in the business, so you probably likely know numbers better than I do. But let's say a regular MLS game is watched by 500,000 people. I'm not sure. I think
that's generous.
Right. And so what percentage of our population is that? That's less than that. Like that's a tenth of 1% almost.
Right.
I mean, that's not going to make it. So long term, we need to have Americans watch soccer, and we need this country to be behind soccer, because that will generate TV revenue. That will generate all the other revenue that will make us competitive with anyone.
Right.
So now we can buy being competitive on the field, but are we buying that long term if we don't have Americans actually watching the game?
So I would argue that actually more Americans watch soccer than watch MLS, right? Like MLS is not even the most watched soccer league in the US. It's Liga MX, followed by the Premier League. So there are a lot of Americans. I don't know exactly what those numbers are, but if you look at TV, viewing and TV contracts, there are plenty of Americans that watch soccer. Maybe it's 5% or 10% of the country. 10% might be generous, right. But they're not watching MLS.
Well, 10%, for example, would be, so last week, Kansas City Chiefs played Philadelphia Eagles, right, on Monday Night Football. Right. They had roughly 30, it was 29.5 million, but let's just call that 30 million people watch the game, right? That's less than 10% of the population.
Yeah.
But that's a huge number. So could we at least at one point get to 1 or 2% of the population? And that's a big number. You're talking about 6-7 million people watching an MLS game. We need that.
Yeah.
We need that. And we have to get there. So the fact that an owner comes in now and spends $1 billion to have an MLS team, I think it's great. But I think now's the time to figure out, how do we get people, how do I go in New Jersey here, to the bar and hear two people talking about soccer or about the Red Bulls? How do I get that to happen?
What does MLS need to do to get there?
Yeah, that part I don't know. That's why they have all the people with all the analytics working in the office. They have, but we need that. So in order, you were asking me the question about, where are we? How do, what do we need to do? And I think we need to get our eyes on our game. We need people to believe in our game here, because otherwise it doesn't seem to me like it's sustainable to keep, I know the value of the franchises keep going up, but are the numbers of viewers going up like the franchises are going up? That's the question.
I think we're expanding into new markets, but a lot of the old markets are not growing in terms of MLS, right? They're stagnating a little bit. I think that's fair to say. But yeah, it's the $1 million question. What can we do to make soccer more popular here? Do you think it's more popular than it's ever been? Or do you think it's a sort of hovering around the same? I'm not talking about MLS. I'm talking about soccer in general.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think soccer in general is definitely more popular.
Mm-hmm.
nationwide. It's definitely more popular. Now you will hear something on TV about soccer. Certainly Messi coming to the league connects us with the rest of the sports because he's at the level of a LeBron James. He's at that level. And so, and I say that at that level here, obviously all over the world, he's at a much higher level than LeBron James. But, and no disrespect to LeBron James, by the way, obviously an amazing, one of the best players ever in the NBA. But he puts it, Messi puts us there, and that's a great thing. And he gets people talking on TV. So I think that part of it is covered. But it's everything else. Do we have the rest of the league? So are we more popular? I mean, that would be interesting to know if you went around New Jersey today and you asked people in general, name me two, Red Bull players compared to, let's say, 30 years ago, if people would have come up with my name and Tony Meola's name, for example, in this market,
Yeah.
Would there be a lot more people today that can name you two Red Bull players than people who would name myself and say Tony Meola because we were the local guys, right, on the MLS team? I think that's a question to answer. I'm not sure what the answer is to that. I would hope that more people can name Red Bull players. That's what I would hope because it's 30 years later.
But they don't even fill up they barely half fill a stadium over at the Red Bulls, and it's a 25,000 seater over there. So doesn't feel like progress in 30 years.
Yeah, that I don't know. You always have also the people that just buy tickets and then don't go to the games because, so so I don't, that part of it, I'll try to stick to saying things I know. So I'm not sure whether there's sellouts anyway and people don't go. I mean, that's something to talk to the club about. That part I don't know.
So thank you for your time, Tab. I do have one last question. You've had stints with Houston and with Hartford Athletic. I know now you're helping out the New England Revolution with some assistant coaching until the end of the year. What does the future look like for you? Are you still excited about coaching? Do you want to get into broadcasting? And what's your ideal, if you could pick, what does the next couple of years look like for Tab Ramos? What is it?
Well, I've been, I enjoy the coaching a lot. Unfortunately, my last couple of jobs didn't go well. But that's the way it is. That's the way soccer is. Certainly have not been one to quit. So I'm hoping I can keep coaching. I'm not sure what the future will bring. There's a couple opportunities I have in front of me now that I'll have to explore. But we'll see. I'm not sure what I have a lot of experiences now. And so I'm a little bit more selective in terms of what I'm going to do moving forward. I know I took a chance on the last couple of jobs that I had, thinking, hey, I'm great. No matter what, I'm going to do really well here. And I got that wrong. And that's on me, on no one else but me. So, yeah, I have to be more selective, but it's not as easy when you haven't done well lately.
Right.
So we'll see what happens. But, regardless of what I do, it's hopefully always continuing to help to build soccer in this country because we need that.
Yeah, we really do. I really appreciate your time, Tab. You're on Twitter, Tab Ramos. You're pretty easy to find if anybody wants to give you a follow. And yeah, do you have anything else to say? Any last word or message for soccer fans in the U.S.?
No, I think we're living through exciting times. We have a great league that continues to grow. And I think we have some national team players that I think all the fans should be really excited about. And because hopefully they will lead us to places where we haven't been led before.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Tab. You have a great one.